Hello everyone and welcome to my honest opinions on Dead Cells. This is a new game, came out a couple of weeks ago in early access and I've been playing it since the closed beta. So I've got about 32 hours in it now. It's a side-scrolling platformer with a lot of different influences. It's got some roguelike influences, and specifically the roguelite genre where you have permanent upgrades that build up between each run. It has some Metroidvania influences it's got non-linear levels that you can't always explore every inch of at the start of your playtime. But again, as you go through, you'll unlock upgrades that allow you to access different areas, more difficult zones and so on. And it's also got some Dark Souls influences in that it has challenging, like harsh but fair combat, where getting hit is very punished because the enemies do a lot of damage. So it's all about learning their patterns, evading them, and fighting them on your terms as much as you can. Unlike most of my previous Honest Opinions videos, I'm going to actually try playing the game in this one. Unlike my previous games that I've reviewed. Probably, I imagine the majority of people aren't familiar with this. Ooh, what's up here? Nothing, okay. So this is the start room. You begin every run in here with this mysterious dead giant in the corner. As you can see, the movement is fairly dynamic. You've got a double jump, a dodge roll, which you can do in the air. You've got a ground slam, which you can do from the very beginning of the game. It's not an unlocked upgrade. Just press down and A to slam down to the ground, which also does damage, helps with traversal. Right now I don't have any weapons, they're over to the right. There's this really neat mechanic where some of your gold persists between runs, which allows you to build up a stash over time. But you have to unlock that as you go. This screen here, I really like this. Despite the physics, despite the pixel art, these are actually physics objects. I spoke to the developers at one point at a convention, and from what I remember, this game is actually rendered in using 3D models, sort of painted into a pixel art 2D visual, so you can have these kind of physics-based behaviors in the background. Each of these contains an item that I've unlocked, as you can see. I've been playing for a while, so I've got most of it. Let's grab some starting stuff. We have melee weapons, shields, and bows, which are like... Bows have this kind of cool mechanic where they run out of ammo. The shots stick in enemies, and you get them back when the enemies die, which unfortunately makes them a bit weak against bosses. So this is the sort of starter level. I'm a big fan of how they put this together. The first level is pretty easy. I think you can beat it. We'll come back to this in a minute. You can beat it quite quickly. You know, I think it only takes a few tries into your playtime with the game to be able to reliably beat this level. It's not difficult, so it's mostly about setting up your initial upgrades, acquiring weapons and skills, which you can see in the... If you see my status at the bottom left, there's a couple of empty cells which are basically activated abilities. So basically setting up your initial build, trying to assemble any synergies. So, as you can see, the blocking enemies is quite rewarded. Like, that guy was stunned for a little while, and was able to kill him quite quickly while he was blocked. And as you can also see, there's some non-linearity to the levels. This big thing here is a teleporter, which makes it easy to backtrack through individual zones as you explore them. So the whole idea is to find all the different paths of this level. This here is a transport coffin. You can't use these until about... how long did it take me? Like 10 hours in? And they can allow me to access this more difficult zone. So there's a lot of mechanics that are all about unlocking... This is the Metroidvania stuff, basically. You get a rune at some point by fighting an optional boss that allows you to use the purple coffins. Speaking of optional bosses, there's one in there. So now that I've unlocked this teleporter, I can go back to the other one just by tapping a button and keep exploring all the branching paths. I mentioned earlier on that you stack up gold between runs. This helps with acquiring upgrades like this. Obviously, I've killed a few enemies so far in the level. There's nowhere near enough to get this kind of upgrade. But it means that as you go along, you get access to these more powerful upgrades once every few runs. And later on, once you have a large gold persistence bonus, you can just get them wherever you want. what I just picked up is a heart that will resurrect me if I die, which makes it much more powerful to do... it makes it possible to do much more powerful runs once in a while. Oh, I love this weapon. The repair is one of my favourite designs. It gets an enormous damage bonus immediately after you've dodge rolled, so you're encouraged to roll before attacking all the time, kind of pushing you into this evasive playstyle. You see how I was able to, like, air dodge off the ladder? The whole playstyle of the game is very heavily focused on its movement mechanics. Weapons like the Rapier are a big expression of that. This is basically a level up that will permanently increase my health. As you can probably guess, I really like this game. I fell in love with it basically at the convention I was at. You can kind of see why, like, the sheer dynamism of how you play, between the teleporters letting you backtrack easily, the movement system that lets you dart around dynamically, basically at will. The fact that you start the game with a ground slam, I think these are all, like, amazing touches. Small things like, you know, if you break a door, enemies next to it are stunned. It's very rare that you, like, all this stuff I'm doing with the flips and the dodge rolls and things like that, you can do this all out of the gate. Like, the Rapier is a starting weapon. I don't think it takes very long to unlock at all. And then we have these shops. Let's grab a couple of skills. So these skills are kind of cooldown special attacks. The game calls them skills, but I think a more appropriate name would be like activated abilities. I'll just demonstrate. That's an Ivy Bomb. You can see it's cooling down, and they're available every few seconds. And you can upgrade them by leveling up. This guy, this is the Collector. This is the persist between runs part of the game. Once you beat a level, you get the ability to spend these cells, dead cells that you've picked up off the enemies, hence the name, on permanent upgrades. These allow you to unlock weapons. If you find blueprints during the level, they turn into weapons here, or items that you can unlock. And you can also do things like permanently give yourself access to healing potions in greater number, which work like Dark Souls' Estus Flasks. It's a thing you activate and you gain some health. You start with none, but after a bit of grinding you have 4. And upgrade your ability to recover gold between runs. So there's a lot of leveling up that you can do over the course of your playtime, which I really like. I appreciate when roguelikes don't force you to do everything from scratch every time. I much prefer the Crypt of the Necrodancer style roguelike setup where over time you will get better. So not only are you learning more of the game, but you have these satisfying moments of like, yes, I have a more powerful character now. And it means that it also helps the designers gate content. Like you can make the game kind of overly difficult to start with, which then unlocks the option of adding a hard mode by making people run it from scratch with no upgrades. Like Crypt of the Necrodancer has this with an all zones mode, where you start with, I think you start with all the weapons unlocked, but no health upgrades. So you start with only 3 hearts of health. I imagine there'll be the same thing in this game eventually, where you start with no healing potion upgrades and no gold, but all the weapons unlocked for things like speedrunning and challenges. I've unlocked, as far as I can tell, all the items. Once you do that as a cell sink, they've added this mechanic where you can spend a bunch of cells to increase their damage. So I've got 5% damage bonuses on basically everything. And again, I really like this style of mechanic because it makes it much easier for noobs like me. I'm not very good at games like this. I mean, I'm very comfortable with Dead Cells specifically, but that's because I've been playing it a bunch. I'm not good at action games. My reflexes aren't great. I don't have the years of practice that a lot of people had because I wasn't allowed to play games when I was a kid. These bats are annoying. Ooh, hello. I'm going to pick this thing up. This is entertaining. One of the worst things you can do in this game is get surrounded by enemies. But a quick bit of blocking will let me get out of this. So you're probably beginning to see the structure of the game now. This is the second zone, or one of the optional second zones. I think that there are 3. After the first level, you can go to this place, the Promenade of the Condemned. There's the Ossuary, which is this gross, kind of meat processing plant thing. And the sewers, which are sewers. Pools of goo. Horrible, gross scorpions that ambush you. Kind of typical sewer level stuff. The sewers have actually had some substantial balance problems over time that have been improved during the beta, actually. As you can see, some of the level ups don't give you a choice. You either get health, strength, or skills pre-subscribed. And some of them do, allowing you to fill gaps in your lineup. So, as you can see on the screen, you can either buff your health bar, the amount of damage you do with your normal attacks, your melee attacks, and your bows, or the damage and cooldown on your skills. Which actually makes for quite a meaningful distinction. Because each level up is very significant, it's not like, oh, you have 1% more thing like it is in some long RPGs. Like, the buffing your strength will increase your damage by like 30% or so each time. Same with health. With the skills, I think it chops 10% off the cooldown timer, and I'm not entirely sure how much it buffs the damage. So if I pause, you can see how, like, you can see my cursor here. I've got these 4.5 seconds on these skills that normally take 5 seconds to charge up. I love the attention to detail in some of the movement systems. Like, this platforming thing, you can do it with just a double jump, but you can roll in the air if you like. There's some cool ways to get bonus movement. There's a shield called the Assault Shield, which dashes you forward when you use it. And you can do some ridiculous trick jumps with that. Using the ground slam to navigate speeds you up as well. Like, between the double jump, the roll, and the ground slam, you can basically cheat at the movement very efficiently. Once I'd gotten used to the game, I found myself dodge rolling around like a speedrunner, which is really satisfying. You feel very much in command of your character in this game. This is a kind of a set piece where... oh god, that was mistimed. Oh. Ah yes, so the dodge roll is on a cooldown, which got me there. I wasn't able to dodge out of that zombie's way when he attacked me. There's an interesting mechanic in this game where the enemy attacks tend to do a lot of damage, but when you take damage, you get this kind of orange health portion of your health bar. That's an elite, we'll come back to him in a minute. The orange health degrades more slowly than the green health, which drops down immediately. Oh god. This guy here is an elite. Elites are basically sub-bosses. They're optional. They didn't used to be, but... oh god, this guy's actually going to wreck me. There we go. You don't have to fight elites, but they tend to be... they drop good rewards, like this grenade, which is fairly powerful. You might pick that up. As well as, you know, basically bragging rights. I find myself beating them because I enjoy the challenge a lot of the time, which I think is a good place for optional mini-bosses to be. It used to be that the elites would just be active constantly and they'd chase you around. Once they get bigger, they will start teleporting around after you. And they used to do that straight away, which is a bit tedious, because if you got an elite in amongst a bunch of other enemies, it would kill you very quickly. As you can also see, the game mixes these platforming challenges in between sections of combat. The way the procedural generation works in Dead Cells is actually fascinating. I need some health. Why am I doing this so badly? Please stop. There we go. Let me just concentrate on getting past these spikes that I can normally do properly. There we go. What was I saying? Yes, the way Dead Cells levels are constructed is actually really clever. The game it uses procedural generations. It's not the same each time. However, the levels are constructed from handmade pieces. So you probably, if you're paying attention, you might have noticed that 3 spike ball puzzle was actually repeated. Is that better than my grenade? It might be. No, it's pretty sweet. Actually, it's probably better than the Death Orb. This means you get basically a series of little set pieces that chain together organically. It's not a perfect system. because it relies on the game having enough biomes to stay interesting. But, not biomes, that's the wrong word. But, you know, enough little pieces to stay interesting. But there's a decent number of them in the game, so you don't usually see repeated sections over the course of a level. And there are different ones for different zones. So we've reached the end of this level. It almost has the same end piece. Each of the way the game is structured is after the first level, there's 3 zones you can go to, and each one of those has like a part 2. And you can get from any of the part 1s to any of the part 2s if you know where to look. I'm just following like the basic route here without any of the optional parts. Like you can't get to the sewers or the ossuary immediately when you start playing. You have to pick up some runes which are found from optional mini-bosses first, before you can progress. So this is the ramparts, this is the part 2 of the Promenade of the Condemned. I really like this level, it's very visually striking. There are pits of death, they're a bit annoying. You lose, I think, 25% of your health if you go down. So as you can see, the skills are kind of really good initiating moves. Oops. Because they have a long cooldown, each skill might only be useful once or twice during a given fight. But they're really good to start off with, because you can scatter and disrupt the enemies or immobilize them, or depending on whatever else you're doing. As you can also see, right, we're progressing to the right over the course of this level, but there are lots of places where you can go down. And this is the general structure of quite a few of the levels in Dead Cells, where they'll have a main path and some optional paths. It varies heavily based on the zone. Like the sewers are just a kind of a maze, but it's broken up into subsections where there's definitely a beginning and end. Oh god, I'm actually going to die. Health potion. These bugs that you can see below me, I think are one of the most frustrating aspects of the game. They come at you in enormous droves, and they're very difficult to deal with. Although having a big grenade doesn't hurt. Oh god. This weapon is especially bad against them because it can't hit them when they're standing on the ground. So I have to basically spam my grenades to get through. Fortunately works pretty well. It's very easy to die in a section like that. Like I'm lucky that I have 2 AoE grenades that let me get through. Is that better than... That is better than my existing weapon. One nice thing about this game, we haven't really seen it in this particular run, but there's a strong incentive. There's a strong incentive to synergize with your builds. You might have noticed that oh god. You might have noticed that the weapon I just picked up has these guys are so annoying. Die. The weapon I just picked up has if you look at the top left, has a damage bonus on burning targets. So there's a few damage over time effects you can apply. There's burning, poison, and... what's the other one? Blood. Bleeding. Which also synergize with other effects, like they might have bonus damage against poisoned enemies. They might poison enemies when you parry, poison enemies when you hit them. Excuse me, poison enemies that damage you. There's like various ways to apply and then benefit from these effects. There are certain skills that benefit from enemies being frozen. That's another status effect you can apply. It doesn't do damage, it just immobilizes them. And I think there's a few ways to buff things like attacks that are delivered while you're in the air, which also includes your ground slam, which is really nice. Oh, I mistimed that. So this weapon is quite interesting. It's called the Twin Daggers. The third attack does massive damage, so you're heavily incentivized to attack in like a chain. Yeah, ground slam. But of course, following through the full animation commits you. So it's again, this very Dark Souls risk versus reward gameplay that's seeded throughout the game. There's a lot of aspects where, you know, sometimes you use your grenade too early or use your dodge too early and it's off cooldown and you can't respond to something the way you'd prefer to. Oh, I missed. I'm like okay at this game, but I'm definitely not perfect, as you can see. What do you think? What do I not like about this game? There's definitely an incentive to play very conservatively. Like, it's really easy to just, you know, for instance, I can go down and kill this guy, or I can throw grenades at him until he dies, right? I can just wait. And there are some enemies in the game that are so powerful if they get even one hit in, that it's really difficult to approach them directly. Like, the bugs definitely count for that. Like, some enemies will break your guard if you block them as well, which makes it much more impractical to just wade in and start fighting them mano a mano. The elites kind of count for this, but they're actually... their teleporting chasing ability makes it a bit more impractical to try and beat them up at range. Oh god, I'm gonna die to this. That was lucky. I got lucky there, the bug flew into the... oh god. You know I mentioned I had a heart that saves you if you die? That's what just happened. Please die. Nope. Wrecked. Oh, I overcommitted to that. Definitely overcommitted to that. And obviously, it's a roguelike, so when you die, that's it. You're done. You're back to the start. But, thanks to the upgrades that we collected along the way, one of my weapons is slightly better, or maybe I've unlocked some stuff for earlier in the playthrough. I still get to keep my gold. I spent a fair amount of it, so that's not very much, but... and now I'm back with different starting weapons, that's an upgrade. There's basic weapons that you start with at the beginning of the game, and later on you can randomize them with upgrades. And we're back to the beginning, and now I might, you know, I've got a different choice of weapons here, different choice of weapons in the level itself. I might end up playing a very different build over the course of the game. I'm sorry that I messed up and don't get to show you the boss here, but that's fine. The boss is fine. He's reasonable. I think... so going back to what I was saying about enemies incentivizing you to play conservatively. I died there because I got greedy, right? I overcommitted to fighting an elite that maybe I wasn't really kitted out for. Like, the twin daggers aren't very good because you have to attack with them for a while to get the maximum damage output. They're a bit clunky. Which elites have faster attacks and do more damage than normal enemies, and are surrounded by little dudes, which makes it very difficult to kill them with weapons like that. Same with the boss. Because of that, it's very easy to go, well, actually, I'll just throw grenades at them instead. Which takes a long time. It's not a very effective way of killing things, but it does work. Like, sometimes you just have to sit there and use, you know, a freezing grenade to immobilize them and a trap to deal damage to them while they're standing on it or something. And you just kill, like, the later levels after the boss. They're full of these very big, very tough enemies. They're often surrounded by smaller enemies that are nimble and difficult to fight. Often, then again, in confined spaces. And with all of that, it's like, well, I could wade in here and just die. Or I could stand at the outside and throw grenades in until everything is clear, or there's only one thing left, and then go in and kill that. So you make a lot less use of your melee weapons than you normally would. I think the ammo mechanic on the bows is intended so that you can't just use the bow from afar, right? You have to eventually go in and clean up with your melee attack. But that means bows are useless against the boss, because he has a bucket of health. So if your weapon is a bow, you can't actually beat the boss without some kind of damage over time effect or the skills. Like, actually, the first time I managed to beat the boss was by doing that. I had a bow, so I did a bit of damage with it, and then it ran out of ammo. And I ended up killing him with 2 skills that dealt a bit of damage, and a shield that made him bleed and take poison when I blocked. And I just blocked his attacks for like 10 minutes until he eventually fell over. I'm surprised that I managed it. It took forever. Like, it's a thing you can do. It's kind of a cool that the game gives you the tools to improvise in that way. But it does mean that, like, a good portion of the attacks in this game are just not that useful because they can't be... you can't rely on them against proper enemies, like bosses, things with big health that you find later on, and so on. I like the incentive. I like that the bows are designed that way to incentivize you to use the melee weapons, to take the risk. And And I think the cooldowns on the skills obviously normally incentivize you to do the same. But what I'd like to see is more non-linear approaches to some of the tougher enemies. We saw in the levels I played, there's plenty of different, I don't want to say levels twice in the sentence, but there's like walkways, ways you can get above or below enemies to approach them from different directions. And that makes a big difference. Like you can ground slam and then run away by jumping and climbing up onto a chain where most of the enemies can't follow you, for instance. You can pull aggro of something and lead it away. Like the phasers, the fast-moving teleporting enemies, the white ones, they're really good for that because they'll chase you aggressively, which means you can provoke them and then run away and fight with them one-on-one, rather than fighting them near one of the little protective totems or near zombies that will threaten you. Later on, it becomes much harder to do that. You get big, tough enemies in confined spaces or level ground with nothing above it. And it makes it very difficult to just go in and say, yes, I can fight this thing, or I'm going to peel a couple enemies off and fight them individually with my sword. Instead, I'll just take the conservative route and throw my grenades in. So I think I'd like to see some enemies that were better at range, so that you're incentivized to go in there and hit them. The archers kind of fit that role, but I'd like to see bigger, more powerful ranged enemies that were weak up close. I'd like to see some of the tough later enemies get less tough, especially less difficult to engage mano a mano, as it were, with your sword. And I'd like to potentially see some enemies that were resistant to the skills, like an enemy that can deflect grenades, for instance, or doesn't take blast damage, or can't be immobilized, but then are fragile, so you're able to wade in and kill them quickly with the sword. Just things like that to incentivize the player to take risks, basically, to actually engage with the Dark Souls aspect of the combat, where you have to be able to read enemies and try and find ways to fight them on your own terms. Because there is, right now, for the later levels, there basically is only one way to fight enemies on your own terms, which is to spam them with grenades from afar until they die. There are too many enemies, like big enemies, that can insta-kill you if they hit you with one of their attacks, that it makes it really difficult to say, yeah, I'm going to go in and fight this thing and throw away probably throw away a 10-minute run or a 15-minute run. I think another thing I've advocated for a few times is I would love to see a training mode where you could fight against particular enemies. Crypton the Necrodancer has this, and it works really, really well. Where you can say, I'm going to take these weapons and I'm going to fight against this enemy without the context of a run, without having an unpredictable build or needing to commit to anything. I'm just going to go in and explore how this enemy works or how this boss works. Which really helps you. It means you don't feel cheated when you come up against a new enemy in an actual run. Like, the feeling of exploring the unknown in a roguelike is very compelling, but at the same time, there's essentially so much riding on it. Like, when you die, you lose your run, and you want that to be because you made a mistake, not because you weren't aware of what the enemy was going to do or how much damage they dealt, etc., etc. Like, because each attempt can cost you 10 minutes, plus more if you fail on the earlier levels. It's very difficult to learn and take risks in a roguelike, typically. And with Dead Cells in the state that it's in, the early access still, there's plenty of options to add these kind of features. I would love to see some of that development towards a game that was more amenable to experimentation, which then in turn might encourage players to actually take risks. Like, they can find an approach that works, but it's hard. And they might actually do that rather than taking the safe route of spamming ranged attacks to take out tough enemies that are difficult to tangle with up close. I think, like, rather than necessarily nerfing the player's ability to fight enemies at range, I just like to see incentives to take them on up close. I think that's more interesting. Other than that, I think we're in a really good spot. I'd like to see maybe more non-linearity in the later levels. The level after the boss, the Fog Fjord, has this really cool structure where there are houses and there are upper levels that you can't access until later on. So you go forward through the level and then you backtrack. And through the upper reaches of the buildings that you weren't previously able to access because you have to basically find the stairs. I really enjoy that. I think that's a nice, unique structure. It's kind of satisfying because you see all these big enemies stomping around the upper levels. You're like, oh god, that's terrifying. Wait, I can't even get up there. And then later on you come back and kick their asses. And it's pretty cool. But it doesn't leave you with much of the flexibility that you have during the promenade, the ramparts, the ossuary, which is big and sprawling and full of corners, and the sewers, which are kind of maze-like. They're not as non-linear structurally, like it's basically an area, then a different area, then a different area. But they still have this maze-like feel to them, and especially the second sewer level, the old sewer network, has a much more like non-linear structure than the first sewer level. So I think more of that would also help this incentivizing problem, because if you're just basically wandering through a flat level, like sort of Super Mario style, approaching challenges one by one as they come, it doesn't give you much flexibility in the environment, and it puts you in the same situation when you're approaching an enemy every time. You're never approaching them from above or below, you're always just walking to the right and seeing an enemy approach from the right. So or to the left, I guess, in the fog field. So I'd like to see, these levels are newer than the others, so I can kind of forgive them for having fewer segments. But I'd like to see more non-linear positional stuff, both for the exploration of the game, which I think is a really strong element, like the Metroidvania style where you backtrack a lot, and for the encouraging people to approach problems in different ways and putting them in different situations, reusing the same enemies in different situations, just by making the player approach from different directions each time. I think that makes a big difference. I also like how in some of the levels, especially the ramparts, the non-linear stuff is all optional. Like, the rough structure of the ramparts is you travel to the right and there are bits where you can go down in the buildings. And all of the down bits are optional except one, which happens to contain the lift to the next area. You can't necessarily tell what it is, but you can kind of get to the end of the level and then go down and see. But there's a reward at the bottom of each climb. So you fight down through a bunch of tough enemies, but then you get a level up or a shop or a weapon or a chest, as well as the cells and gold you pick up from fighting the enemies themselves. So it's a really nice risk versus reward thing. When you're new to the level, you can just go to the right and try and beat it. Just to pick up, you might pick up some blueprints and you want to get to the end so you can give them to the collector to unlock them permanently. So you can do that. You can just take the short route, you can run through the level and complete it. In the later levels, you can't really do that. The fog field has some optional bits, but I don't think the graveyard has any that I've seen. Maybe oh no, I lied. There are some small ones. But the majority of the level is linear. I'd like to see some development on that as the game continues. Other than that, like, I really love this game. Obviously I'm focusing on my critique because I want to describe it in depth, but like, this game is fantastic. I really, really recommend it. As well as, like, as you've seen, it's visually appealing. The movement is amazing. It feels really responsive, snappy. As I said, after about 5 or 10 hours, I'm dodge rolling and ground slamming everywhere like a speedrunner. Just kind of these micro optimizations in the movement. And you can make really good use of it in combat, as you saw with the repair incentivizing you to roll behind enemies. The blocking mechanic, I didn't actually describe how blocking works, but kind of like the roll, it has a temporal risk versus reward element. So there are no actual blocks in this game. There are parries. So if I hold the block button, my shield still goes away after a moment. I guess if you mash it, you can block more or less continuously, but there are still moments where you're vulnerable. It's also directional, so if I block to one side, I can get hit from behind, which happened a few times during the run. So that, again, incentivizes like learning the enemies, practicing timing, risk versus reward, careful play. Like, if you overcommit, which I did a few times, and get stuck in between multiple enemies, accidentally or deliberately, you'll take a bunch of damage quite quickly and potentially die. And the health potions allow you to recuperate a few times during each level. And as you unlock, I have the full 4 health potions available. But early on, when you're just starting out, the game is quite punishing because you don't have that way of regaining health. If you hit enemies, I mentioned earlier the orange health mechanic, like if you hit enemies, you can heal some of the orange health after you take damage, so you can regain a portion of the damage you took, but there's still going to be some that you couldn't heal in time, some attritional element. And when you don't have health potions, that's quite punishing. Which is good, that's by design. It means that there's room to grow your character, develop as you go along, which is satisfying. It complements the player's increased skill, so that even if you get stuck and you're not learning very much, you still know that you're contributing overall. Like, every time you reach the collector and you offer up some cells, you're gradually progressing towards excuse me, you're gradually progressing towards an upgrade that will make the game easier for you. So even if you don't learn much for a little while, maybe you're at a plateau, you're stuck, or you're just tilted or playing without paying much attention, whatever, you're still improving, which I think is a real strength of the roguelite approach. In that there's still that guard against, you can never get truly stuck. And, there's, even if you're really blocked by a certain type of enemy, you can level up your character to make it slightly easier as you go, which complements naturally the process of yourself improving. And I think that's a nice kind of player-friendly, forgiving approach to a genre that can very easily be extremely harsh. It's difficult to make a roguelike properly fair, and they really thrive on that. I think Dead Cells does a good job of it, not just because of the upgrading, but also because the way it's balanced, because you can regain health by hitting enemies, that allows you to, if you're in combat, you get surrounded. As long as you're still hitting things, you're not going to take as much damage. Whereas if you fight a lone enemy and you mess up, that situation is easier, so it's more punishing if you get it wrong, which is fine. That's, the game is meant to be a challenge. So the hit things to regain health mechanic means that if the game puts you in a really weird situation, which happens sometimes because it's procedurally generated, like there's a grenadier behind a wall that you can't attack, for instance, and he's shelling you while you're fighting other things, you can make the damage from that one enemy not quite so bad, but you're getting attacked by multiple things. It kind of evens out, you take a roughly same amount of damage per encounter if you get hit, if you know what I mean. Things like the health potions allowing you to make some mistakes during a level and come back. The usual roguelike thing where the weapons are randomized, so sometimes you'll get a weapon that you really mesh with, or a set of skills that's really good, and that allows you to kind of spike a run and make progress you wouldn't have normally made. I think that's a strong benefit of the randomness of roguelikes. And so your ceiling of progress is higher than your average actual ability. So that sometimes you'll get these breakthrough runs where you're like, yes, I got further than I've ever gotten before. Either because you randomly rolled into a good weapon, or you just got lucky and played well. So the randomness that is common to roguelikes actually incentivizes that. And it helps you keep playing because it makes the runs more different, more varied, helps avoid tilt and frustration. And it means that even when you're struggling with with skill at the game, you always have the hope that the game will help you out with some really good bit of randomness that will give you a really strong weapon, or a really powerful synergy between your skills. Like I mentioned earlier, there's damage over time, and then things that combine with those damage over time effects. So sometimes you'll be much more powerful than you would expect, allowing you to cheese your way through a run essentially and get further than you've gotten before, which is really encouraging. It's very healthy for players. I guess this analysis is nothing new to people who are used to roguelites. Like if you've played Crypt and the Necrodancer a bunch, none of what I've said in the last 5 minutes will be massive news. But I think this game does a really good job of marrying that accessibility with challenge in a dynamic, vibrantly coloured, accessible yet challenging platformer framework. And it mixes in the backtracking that I enjoy from Metroidvanias, while simultaneously making it easy with a fast responsive movement system and those teleporters which allow you to backtrack really easily to check out branches of the level you haven't explored yet. So it makes you feel rewarded. Like, you can speedrun to the end if you want. You can just steamroll through a level grabbing the minimum of upgrades. And there are even doors that open if you reach them quickly enough, which means that if you do run quickly through a level, you'll get some rewards later to make up for it. Or you can explore every nook and cranny if you're that kind of person. Yes, I want to maximize my weapon options and my level ups by exploring the level thoroughly, that you get from like immersive sim games and Metroidvanias. And I think that's a really natural marriage with the roguelike concept, where again there are randomized weapons, so you can explore the level more and find, taking risks, because you're rewarded for reaching the end of the level by getting to keep your cells, keep your blueprints that you've found. So you're encouraged to take risks because there could be better weapons in there, there could be level ups, there could be new skills, there could be, even if you're already full, you've got 2 skills and 2 weapons, there might be something that's more powerful or more synergistic with your build, something you find more fun. Like if you just enjoy a weapon, maybe there'll be one there that you like and are good with, which is kind of the same as it being more powerful. So I think that's a really, like, the idea of blending those 2 genres is so clever, and I'm surprised it hasn't been done before. Like, there are roguelikes where you can explore more, like that happens, but the way it's done in Dead Cells, where it very clearly takes lessons from Metroidvania games, I think I love that so much. Like, even the levels get bigger as you unlock upgrades, essentially, because there's more areas that you can access, and it allows you to access more difficult zones that are new challenges for you to keep the game fresh, rather than it being the same linear path every time, which is a problem with some roguelikes. So it reduces the kind of repetitive nature of having a roguelike where you start properly from the beginning every time, because the game is broken up into zones or levels, but they're not. There's no kind of save point like there is in Crypt of the Necrodancer, where you beat a zone and then you move on to the next zone without having to complete the first one first, if you know what I mean. I think that's a good way of balancing the fact that these games can be very grindy, where you're gradually unlocking upgrades, gradually trying to get better at the game, starting from scratch every time, or from a bare minimum. Balancing that and the variety of having, you can complete a section and then you can move on to a different section. You can do that in Dead Cells as well. You can, okay, I'm bored of Promenade of the Condemned now, I'm going to do a bunch of runs through the sewers and experience something different. So I think overall the game is really well put together, feels great to play, it's great to look at, the music's great, it sounds great, and it's excitingly still in development. So although there are some areas that I feel could be developed further or could be improved, I'm fairly confident that they will be. There's going to be more content added to the game, more new weapons, new options, new zones. There's probably, I don't know exactly how much is in the game at the moment. I've gotten 2 levels past the boss, but I haven't beaten the graveyard yet, so I'm not sure what's beyond it. I think there's another boss, and then that might be it, but don't quote me on that. But I think there's going to be more beyond that, since I think at the convention I went to, the devs mentioned they were aiming for a total playthrough of about an hour and a half. I don't know if that's still the case. That seems very long, but maybe that's including all the different zones. So it'll probably take you about half an hour to 45 minutes to beat a run fully from start to finish, with non-linear options along the way. But yeah, I think I've probably spoken for long enough now. I hope you enjoyed this video. As you can probably guess, I heartily recommend this game. It is awesome. Do check it out. I'm not sure if there's a demo, especially as it's still in early access, but it's not too expensive. It's on Steam for about 12 quid, 15 quid. I think $17 in the US. Yeah, so thumbs up from me. Awesome game, very impressive, and I really look forward to see how it develops in the future. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.